Now, I'd like to say that the inspiration for this speech this evening actually came to me several months ago on a Sunday morning when I was hearing Michael talk about wisdom. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, what a great topic and how needed that is in the world. And I speak for myself. I speak to so many people. I read so much, but there's so little good guidance about how to live my life with wisdom. So that's the topic of our discussion tonight. And to deliver our address, our club has invited the Reverend Dr. Michael Jensen, who is described as a clergyman, author, lecturer, and speaker. But people are usually introduce Michael from the beginning, left to right, that is to say, the Reverend Dr. Michael Jensen. So we're going to introduce him right to left. Okay, the Jensen, I'm advised, comes from Denmark, and Michael is the son of the former Archbishop of Sydney, Peter Jensen. Michael is the oldest of two brothers, three brothers. Yes, I've only met one, but there are three Jensen boys. The doctor is the academic side. Michael has taught English literature at preparatory schools here in Sydney after his time at the University of Sydney. He has a PhD from Oxford University, and he has taught theology at Moore College. The reverend part is that he has been the rector at St. Mark's, Darling Point since 2013. In fact, Michael and I arrived at St. Michael's within a week of each other. But as an active author, lecturer, and speaker, Michael's breadth of wit is enormous. He's the author of 11 books, numerous articles. I turn on the drum, all sorts of things. I'm always bumping into Michael on television. I pick up my little daily East Sydney newspaper. There's Michael writing within it. And he's part of a tremendous podcast, with all due respect, that he has with his co-host, Megan Powell-Dutoit. Did I say that correctly, Michael? Dutoit, c'est français, who is a Baptist minister. And I have to tell you that listening to this podcast is so informative, because I got to understand things like cancel culture and all sorts of interesting topics. If you want to tune into that, you can subscribe to Michael's daily devotional through the St. Mark's website. And on the bottom, there's almost always a link to this podcast. Of course, you can call it up at not only the podcast, but interesting articles. Let me say that as someone who lives in the community, Michael is a very, very approachable man. I see him in the gym. I see him walking around Edgecliff in his shorts, sweating. It's it's very, very, very comforting to know that your spiritual leader is also someone who associates and is approachable by everyone. Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you with great thanks, and sit back and enjoy the talk.
Well, thank you very much for that that glowing introduction. And I glow when I'm sweating, so appropriate in that level. I have to say I've seen Tom sweating too, so let's. The feeling is mutual. It's a great honour to be asked to address Rotary at King's Cross. This is the second time I think I've been with you, although I've been with you in person a number of years ago. And I should hasten to add, it's a great topic to be asked to address you on. A topic that I think is really very much needed in our contemporary world. It's a world of much foolishness. And so to think about wisdom is a really important thing to do. I should hasten to say, I know many of you from the pews at St. Mark's, and it's great to see so many familiar faces. But the purpose of today's talk is not to speak purely from a religious point of view. My hope is that whether you're religious or not, or whether you're from a different religion, you belong to a different religion, that there'll be something of value here. The questions we address are worth addressing. And so to speak, I will certainly be speaking from the book from which I speak. I'll be speaking from what Christians call the Old Testament, what Jews call the Bible. I'll be speaking, referring to that ancient text and seeking some ancient wisdom. But my hope is that you could be an atheist and find something valuable in what we say, in the questions that we address, and in the perspective that I put forward. And I'd love to hear a robust conversation about that too. I'd be very interested in hearing back from people from different perspectives about whether these ideas resonate. I've been giving talks on topics like forgiveness and apologizing, and I often find there's enormous common ground that we can share over these particular issues. But I want to start by asking, I suppose the subtitle of tonight's talk is, the title is Living Life with Wisdom. And the subtitle, Thomas almost gave it away, which is really, how should we live? How should we live? It's a perennial and ongoing question, a question that religions have addressed and philosophers have addressed, self-help gurus have addressed, and our politicians also try to address. So it's a question that we have in common as human beings. But I want to begin by actually taking us to a model human, someone who has been, for many of us, a model human being, and that is Stephen Hawking. And ask, was Stephen Hawking one of the smartest people who has ever lived? Was he actually a wise person? Because one of the confusions I think we have in our common way of thinking is the confusion between smart and wise, intelligence and knowledge and wisdom. A new biography has come out by a man called Charles Seif. It's called Hawking, The Selling of a Scientific Celebrity. It's a great title, Hawking. It shows that Stephen Hawking was indeed a genius who changed the course of physics through his work on black holes and the Big Bang. And of course, an impressive person in many ways. He overcame the terrible suffering of motor neuron disease with this tenacity. And in 1988, he achieved this iconic status with his book, A Brief History of Time. It's a great way, if you want to find out if someone's a liar, by the way, you ask them if they've actually read A Brief History of Time, because apparently the rumor is that lots of people bought it, but nobody actually read it. So if you have read it, you claim it all you like. I'm not sure I'll believe you. Anyway, the best-selling unread book. After that came appearances on shows like The Simpsons and invitations to comment on everything from artificial intelligence to space travel to philosophy, subjects about which he didn't actually know that much, was not his speciality. But because of his celebrity, his every word was treated like a divine oracle. He became, as this quite critical biography shows, shamelessly self-promoting to the point of arrogance and heedless of what others might think. It would not be too much to say that he was an atheist, because there wasn't room in Hawking's worldview for another God besides him. Meanwhile, his personal life was quite complex. He left his first wife of 30 years, her name was Jane, for one of his nurses in 1990. But he'd not chosen well, and this relationship was quite a tempestuous one, with allegations that this new wife abused and belittled him. It caused a deep rift with his children. He was also apparently given to visiting strip clubs and had rather reconstructed views about women. As an academic, he was known for not sharing the limelight with those who had done the actual work, and he was also known for the questionable treatment of his students. Now, I don't think Hawking was a particularly bad person. He had many virtues, but the point is that his profound intelligence did not make him a saint, did not give him exceptional wisdom for living. And I tell this story because I think this story tells us something about our contemporary culture. And it's this: we are so blinded by intelligence and skill that we've lost sight of what it is to be wise. We look to the wise, to the famous, I should say, the wealthy and the clever for wisdom for life, but it turns out that they are no more wise than anyone else. And yet we need wisdom more than ever, because life has become more and more complex. Navigating modern life is a very, very complex business, which involves a lot of wisdom. Life, we may feel, is adrift. Our political culture is deeply divided. There's a tendency to conspiracy, to adopt and believe in conspiracy theories, as anyone with an email account knows. And we're a divided culture about one of the life's most fundamental questions, and that is, what is the good life? And that's partly because we've lost a consensus about what actually we mean by the word good. What's the good life? Well, we don't know what is good. We disagree about what is good. Is it something that we feel? Is it something we can agree on? Is it just a matter of voting together about what the good life might mean? Can an individual simply decide what is good for him or herself? And what's good for me is different from what is good for you. Is it a matter of, is it like baked beans? I like baked beans. You don't like baked beans. That's fine. I think that's good. You don't think that's good. Is that then fine? This is one of the problems we have in deciding what is wise, in that we can't agree on what the good life might be. It's a fraught situation, and it's a situation in which a number of answers come forward, a number of suggested ways forward suggest themselves, a number of possibilities. One possibility is that what is good and what is the good life and what is the wise way to live should be decided by a bunch of rules. And this was a very venerable and ancient way to think about what the good life is. Can someone's got, should put the mute button on, because there's a little bit of an echo or a bit of extra sound coming in. So if I could ask you to put your mute button on, that would be great. Awesome. So it could be that there's rules from above that we need to just obey or adopt. And of course, this was for many religions the answer. I mean, we might think of the 10 Commandments, the 613 rules of the Torah in Judaism, or perhaps we might read the Sermon on the Mount in this way. Perhaps there are just a bunch of rules and we should just obey the rules, and that's sufficient. Only the problem with this is, first of all, I guess a lot of people have moved away from that sense of the rules. The rules do feel, the idea of rules feels very restrictive, but of course, rules can't cover everything. New situations arise, and we need to have, where do we get new rules? What do we do when we're confronted by a completely new situation, an ethical situation we haven't dreamed up before? This happens all the time, especially with new technologies. So what tends to happen is the scientists beetle away in their laboratories and come up with some newfangled technology. And then they ask, well, is this the right thing to do? But we haven't decided, and we've got no rule to appeal to. So the rules aren't sufficient. So what about principles? There's some principles on which we could decide what the good life is, good morally, good pleasure in terms of pleasure. And there are a number of philosophies that aim to help us with this. Chief among them today, utilitarianism. Heard of utilitarianism? Utilitarianism basically says the greatest happiness for the greatest number is the principle that we should adopt when we're thinking about the good. Of course, we're right in Rotary's territory here. Rotary is trying to do the good, but it's worth asking what is the good and what is the wisest way to do what is good. Well, utilitarianism says, let's make a calculation. It's a bunch of maths. You get your pen out, you get your beer mat out, and you make a calculation. If you've ever heard Peter Singer, the great Peter Singer, one of the world's leading philosophers and an Australian to boot, this is what he does. I've heard him give a talk, and when it comes to making an ethical decision, he basically tries to make a calculation as best he can using his principles. The trouble is, you still have to decide what principles. You have to decide what the greatest good. If you're going to say what the greatest good is for the greatest number, you have to have decided in advance what that good is. And once again, is the greatest good, what we all are saying? I mean, is that up to each person to decide, or where does that come from? Immediately we start talking about this, we're talking about something external to ourselves, not something merely that we might feel personally. So what about the issue of character instead? Perhaps it's not rules we should pursue or principles we should adopt, but forms of character types of character, virtues that we should pursue. And so some thinkers these days have said, don't worry about the rules. It's the sort of particular virtues we should pursue. And love is usually the one that's adopted today. We should pursue, if love is a virtue, we should pursue love. It doesn't matter what you do, so long as you are, say, kind or loving. And that should guide you at every point. Of course, you're still left with the problem, what is love? What is it to be kind? And also, are there other virtues that you should pursue? Are there other things that we should add to that list of virtues? Is that enough to guide us in pursuing the good life? And how does that help me with moral dilemmas that are presented in front of me? Okay, so that's some of the sort of the landscape in which we have to address this problem of how we should live life with wisdom. And I think what makes it really complex is four what I call knowledge problems that we are presented with in the contemporary world. Four knowledge problems. The first knowledge problem is that we're drowning in information. We're absolutely drowning in information. Now, the American comedian Bo Burnham has just produced you can find his Netflix special called Inside. It's a perfect comedic special for lockdown. It's a musical with one bloke in a room for an hour, just singing songs and making comments. It's really the life we're living right now, right? And he's written a song about the internet, and he calls the internet, welcome to the internet, he says, a little bit of everything all of the time. And I think this sums up what the internet's like. It's like you don't have to speculate anymore about any question. At any time, you can find an answer to almost anything. It's almost hard to think of the question that you can't ask the internet, except the trouble is the internet doesn't ask or doesn't answer the really important questions. How should we live? What is wise? The internet can diagnose your disease. It can give you pi to a million places, but it can't tell you how to live. So we're drowning in this information. Secondly, the second knowledge problem we have is that we have this huge faith in science and technology. Science and technology has been unparalleled. It's been extraordinarily successful. This is the Stephen Hawking problem, right? It's extraordinarily successful in describing our world and also giving us inventions that help us to live in a more, in a kind of, we might say, have improved our lot, improved our lives. So it's given us air conditioning. It's given us, more seriously, it's given us the contraceptive pill. It's given us international air travel, not that we can use it at the moment. The science, we're trusting the science to give us the vaccination, right? And I think it's a good thing for us to do. But science does not tell you how to live. We have this unparalleled faith in it. And so we start asking it questions that it cannot answer. We assume that science can answer any question and that scientists can. And yet they're no more wise in these sort of questions than any of us. Thirdly, we have the third knowledge problem. So we have drowning information, the trust in science and technology that don't tell us everything. And thirdly, we have the problem of specialization. And this is the problem that we now actually have specialists for almost every single aspect of life. And yet what it takes to live well is broad knowledge, is knowledge across a lot of fields. In fact, you might say that a person with less information might be a wiser person because they're able to diversify. They're able to meet life in a more rich and diverse way. So that's the problem of specialization. And then the last knowledge problem is the problem of conspiracy theories, our proneness to believe conspiracy theories. I'm fascinated by conspiracy theories. The trouble with conspiracy theories is that sometimes it is true that there is a conspiracy. There are conspiracies. But because there are conspiracies doesn't mean that they're conspiracies all the time, or that we have a right to believe them. And yet, because of the sheer volume of information we have, nobody can know everything, so that at any one point you can question anyone saying anything. So it's possible to construct a conspiracy theory and get around almost anything and undermine the valid claims of science, for instance. And so that leaves us in a place where we don't trust. And to know things and to live wisely, it turns out we need to have faith. We need to trust. And this is where I want to go next, because people, I'll pause in a minute and ask for maybe some comments or questions or points for clarification. But this is one of the great myths of the modern world, is that faith and reason are opposites. In fact, that's completely not true. We need faith in order to have knowledge. I'm not saying you need to have faith in God necessarily to have knowledge, but you need to trust, because a key component of any human knowing anything is knowing that you don't know everything. So you need to trust that there is knowledge out there that others have, and to trust their knowledge. And so faith needs to go in, faith or trust is an essential component to knowing well. Before I go on to talk about that, because that's what's going to shape our discussion of wisdom, I just wondered if there were any comments, just brief comments or observations or questions for clarification at that point. Just wave your hand. And Chris.
Would you relate wisdom to maturity?
Yes, definitely. That's why in the Bible and in other traditions as well, grey hair is associated with wisdom. But see, we live in a celebrity culture which values youth and gives youth, it accords youth wisdom. And this is silly, because young people, it turns out, don't know anything. That's normal. That's okay. They do know some things, and it's worth listening to them. But that's okay. It's okay. This is the normal way of things, is you don't listen to 18-year-olds. They shouldn't run the world. But our culture's got that upside down. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, Ken.
Michael, where does past history, an understanding of that, and then people that would call themselves futurists, where do they fit into all that to this point?
Sorry, is the question where do historians...
Is it very important, if you're going to be a wise person, you need to know history so you don't repeat mistakes?
Yes.
And then a lot of people, some people have the gift of predicting the future, in a sense, economists and some of those. They have modelling and scenario.
They say they do. They say they do.
Yeah, they say they do. Yeah. So maybe just address the past history thing and knowledge.
I think the discipline of history is one of the absolute, and unfortunately, we're a culture very bad at history. We've turned history into we've got a very one-eyed view of history, which is now I've got to say it's been a response to the to an older school of history, which was very one-eyed too. But history has been turned into the history of oppression. And so what people are taught is that before 1960, everybody was oppressed by everybody else. And that's what history is about. This is a very blinkered view of history. The discipline of history is utterly necessary for us to understand, to be wise, because it makes us humble. And also it makes us aware. And in fact, I think the best way into the future is looking into the past. Mostly, futurology is interesting, but mostly, you hear jokes about even economists saying that astrologers are as good as economists. They know as much about the future. The one thing we do know about the future is that we don't know about the future. So that's a really important thing to know. That is wisdom. So somebody else, any other comments there?
Yes, Michael, may I make a query?
Yes.
I'm interested about the thesis about conspiracy theories.
Yes.
The reason I'm asking that question is that I have personally a number of, at least one close acquaintance who basically has no faith whatsoever in science and technology, and I suppose could be considered a conspiracy theory person. But it's a totally unconscious thing on his part. And the question I'm asking is conspiracy theory, as well as the conscious undermining of science and technology, a conscious thing, or is it, by contrast, a huge unconscious movement akin to what, for example, Jung would call the collective unconscious?
Wow, so that's a really profound question, and I don't know is the answer. I think there is a fear, and Jung is extremely interesting. But I think fear governs a lot of people's behaviour around knowledge at the moment. So we fear those who know have power. If I don't have power, then I have to. Then I'm afraid of those who do. Then I'm going to undermine the knowledge of the collective knowledge that's being presented. I'm going to see that it is corrupt, and I'm going to be skeptical of it. Mind you, skepticism always comes with a faith somewhere else. So I always ask a conspiracy theorist, what do you actually have faith? You're skeptical of this claim, but you have faith in this. Is your faith warranted? Is your skepticism warranted? Right. So that's a really important. You don't have that. It's not as if there's a person who's just skeptical, just trusting. It's always a balance, and the question is the faith actually warranted in that? Talking to people who are committed to conspiracy theories is one of our contemporary world's greatest challenges, and we're facing it right now. We're facing it right now. We've had a riot this weekend about this, it's interesting because the way to respond to the conspiracy theorist is not to show blind faith in authority, but actually say, yeah, I do agree that the government has made mistakes, which is true, and I do agree that we don't know a lot about the vaccine, about the future of the vaccine. Etc. It's not to kind of just confront their bluster with more bluster. But I think, as always with human beings, the only thing we don't have absolute certainty in anything. So all we've got is the best we can do. And it's important to say that's what we do as human beings. I walk across the road assuming that the bloke on the motorbike is going to obey the traffic rules, but I don't know that he is. But what else can I do? Just one more comment at that point. Thank you, Thomas. I might move on then to talking about the principle of ancient wisdom that I wanted to share with you tonight, which I think is a really profound and deeply helpful principle for our contemporary world. And it comes from the ancient book of Proverbs, which is composed perhaps 600-700 AD, BC, perhaps a bit later than that. It's associated with King Solomon, who was the son of King David. And he possibly composed some of it, although it's called the Wisdom of Solomon because it's associated with him. It's his school, if you like. And he was associated with the idea of wisdom, with inquiry. One of the fascinating things about the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament is it actually includes wisdom from pagan sources. So the authors of the book of Proverbs haven't just seen wisdom as belonging solely to their own religious tradition, but have said, well, no, wisdom is human. It's something that can be observed, and it can be found. If you're observing God's world, then you will find God's wisdom. So they've adapted, perhaps from Egyptian sources, several chapters of Egyptian wisdom. So the scholars say. So this is the book of Proverbs, and the big theme of the book of Proverbs is one verse that comes up again and again, and it's just simply this: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, I'm just going to unpack this a little bit because I think it's a very helpful principle that we get from the Jewish scriptures. The word wisdom, by the way, and pardon my Hebrew pronunciation, but it's chokhmah. It's a feminine word, and actually, chokhmah is presented in the book of Proverbs as a wise lady who preaches in the town square. And you should gather around the wise lady, and her opposite is the lady folly. The lady folly is, of course, stupidity, idiocy, self-interest, and the way of lady folly leads to disaster and ruin. The way of lady wisdom leads to prosperity. And the reason that prosperity and good life, health, etc., and the reason that is that lady wisdom's way runs with the grain of the created order of the world. It observes the world and it runs with it. It doesn't run against it. And so listening to Lady Wisdom, though, we want to start with this concept of the fear of the Lord. And so what does that mean? Well, I want to start word by word. Firstly, the word fear in this case is not the word for knee-knocking fear, knee-trembling, teeth-chattering fear, but actually the word for respect or honor or awe. You might say it's that sense of wonder that we have when we contemplate the enormity of the universe, that sense of size and perspective that we get if we look into a telescope at the distant stars and galaxies. It's that. Or if we are in we're gazing at the distant mountains, which we don't get a lot of in Australia. I do think Sydney would be improved with Zurich's view of the mountains. I do think, we've got the water, we just need the mountains. But gazing at the size of creation, we get a sense of awe and wonder. Not quite terror, but it is a sense of perspective and of our own diminutive perspective, right? Our own size. And so fear, in this sense, the fear of the Lord leads to humility and respect. So that's the first term, fear, leading to a fear, meaning humility and respect. The second term is the one in whom we should fear, and that is the Lord. In the Hebrew Bible, the name of God is his special name, Yahweh, the name that the rabbis do not say. Now, obviously, this is in religious terms a particular entity, but I think in a secular sense, we may understand this as that which transcends you. Because when we start talking about, I've talked about already, the problem of recognizing what the good life is. Whenever we say the word good, we are immediately saying there's something, a standard outside of us, something against which we are measured. If I am to live a good life, an authentic or a true life, then I have to understand that there is some transcendent idea of some concept outside of me that is good, against which I'm going to reference that. I can't just decide it inside myself what the good is. It isn't just a matter of subjectivity. I mean, postmodern thinkers may say that it is. I just don't think anyone lives like that. We don't operate as a society like that. We cannot we cannot, or we end up murdering each other and calling it good, which has happened before. So we don't tend to do that. We don't want to do that. So that which transcends you is the question here, the fear of that which transcends you. And as a person of biblical faith, I want to say that that is the Lord, that he has a particular character. And so I need to respect him, but you may insert in that spot whatever it is that whatever it is for you that is the source of the good, whatever it is against the yardstick against which you measure your life, or against which you think human life ought to be measured. The only thing is, it cannot be just you, because it is deeply unwise to be your own moral arbiter. Okay, so that's the fear then of the Lord. And then the next two concepts are the beginning and the wisdom. And so what's interesting here is that although the Bible gives us laws that are meant to be normative, the beginning of wisdom, we're invited, in fact, into a journey into a life of investigation and observation. So the book of Proverbs tells us that, in fact, there is more wisdom to be found, that we ought to be seeking wisdom in the world, that the world is an ordered and good place, and that in this idea, this humility and this reverence, and this awe, we actually have the beginning of what it is to be wise. It's our foundation, our springboard, our platform. You know, this has been crucial in the setting up of the scientific method, this philosophy, because the scientific method begins with humility. It necessitates humility. You cannot be a scientist in the true sense and be arrogant. And also, the scientific method assumes that the world is an ordered place that will give repeated, the results will not vary. You know, when we do the experiment the same way twice, it should come out the same way. We should discover a predictable world as we investigate it. And this is what wisdom, where we're invited to do wisdom. We're invited to observe, and we're invited to use our minds. It's the beginning here. And so human beings, when we want to seek out what it is to be wise, we ought to investigate it. We ought to talk. We ought to observe, and we ought to shut up. We ought to shut up a little bit, and we ought to not pretend to know more than we do. And that is absolutely wise. We ought to approach the world as though with the awareness of how little we actually know. It's the basis of our inquiry into the world, and it actually gives us our confidence in the scientific method, because it says to us, human beings will make mistakes, and it needs to be repeated, and we need to kind of just test and repeat as we go out into the world. And then lastly, we have this idea of wisdom, that this process, the fear of the Lord, or that which transcends us, this awe, this respect and humility, will be the springboard for the life which actually observes and obtains and is measured by the good. We will find out what is true and beautiful and good by this process. It will be revealed to us as we observe the world, as we investigate, as we go about life in this way, that we will be equipped to decide what is good. When we encounter morally complex situations, we will be able to observe good when we see it in others, and we will receive in it an invitation to do what that which is good. Okay, so my last two things to say, because my time is coming to an end, is that what we get from this principle, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, is a sense of our limits and a sense of our freedom. Limits and freedom. And this is a beautiful thing. First of all, we get a sense of our limits. And I think it's interesting that someone said, was it Chris, there's maturity in this. And that's right, because I think as I get older, I realize how little I know, and that actually makes life an easier thing to live. I think it makes me much, much wiser. It tells me to listen more than speak. it really knocks the edges off my youthful arrogance. My doctoral studies, I think 3 years spent sitting in a room, staring at a screen and reading books. At the end of it, I thought, wow, I really don't know anything. I mean, that was what it felt like. Rather than I've discovered something now, I'm going to reveal it to the world. Always be careful of those people. They're dangerous. Actually, I discovered I don't know a lot. So that was really important. We don't, and I think so the important principle, we don't know as much as we think we do, and we're not God. That's important. I mean, you don't have to believe in God to believe that you're not God. It's an important thing to believe. And this gives us the ability to self-correct. One of the least wise people in the universe is a narcissist who is always right. And that person ends up friendless, lonely, and poor, because they never see it coming. They never see the world coming. They're not observant because they're so infatuated with themselves. So that gives us our limits. And secondly, this gives us our freedom, because it's an invitation to investigate the world. It's an invitation to think about it using our rational capacity. It's an invitation to step forward into the world, believing that it is a good and ordered place, even when we can't see what its order is. We can proceed on that assumption. We can proceed on the assumption that truth and beauty and goodness are not something that are merely subjective, not as Shakespeare said, or at least I think it was, who was it that said that? Was that Macbeth or Hamlet? One of those. That there is a deeper truth and beauty and goodness in the world as we seek to investigate it. That justice is not a hunch, but something true. The value of human life is substantial and real. And so our hunch, again, that human beings are worthwhile and precious, is not a mistake, and we should proceed as if it's so. And those who deny it are committing grave evil. This is not a mistake. And there is much in this which gives us space for observation and reflection and conversation, I should say. It tells us, by the way, that knowing things and living in the world is a collective effort, not an individual effort, an effort which requires other people. Jean-Paul Sartre once said that hell is other people. Simone de Beauvoir might have said that hell is Jean-Paul Sartre. I don't know how happy their relationship was, but he is gravely mistaken. Hell is not other people. Other people are necessary for the practice of wisdom and wise living. Questions and comments, perspectives. Yes,
Michael? No, that's my daughter's name there, not me.
It's not Mel.
No, it's Philip. I was reflecting on Greta Thunberg, I think, as you were speaking there.
Yes.
And I'm not going to ask you, but if I was to, not you because you're too wise to, but if I was good enough but not wise enough to send her a message and say, here's a suggestion I can make, I wouldn't know what to say, because she's ticked all of those boxes that you said. You know, she's smart, wise, good, inspirational.
Yeah.
I've been facetious, of course, in this, but the point I'm trying to make is, and you spoke about it earlier, that young people are smart and getting smarter. Now, is this going to turn, do you think, in the future? And if it is going to turn, what's going to make it turn? Because it's pushing so hard in one direction.
Turn in what? Turn what? What turn?
Where wisdom is what you were talking about. When young people as a collective group realise that wisdom is important. At the moment now, society is encouraging them. They are encouraged. We have people like Greta, what's her name?
Yeah, Greta Thunberg. Yeah, and I it's easy, it's easy in a room like this to kind of make cheap shots at young people. I've worked with young people. Young people are beautiful, and there is a wisdom in children, and there is a wisdom of the innocence. But young people are extremely manipulatable as well, and also given to catastrophizing. So I think, and so I think that's a danger in someone like Greta Thunberg. I just don't know, what will the years give her? I mean, I think some of the things I remember growing up in the 1980s, we all thought we would die in a nuclear holocaust. So,
Right.
so we're the same. Things never change one level, but the level of anxiety amongst young people is at epidemic levels. It's the real pandemic, one level, and the catastrophizers over environmental destruction are feeding it and feeding on it. And the trouble is not that there isn't an environmental catastrophe coming. There is. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and much as it grieves me, just I don't want the science to be true, but it is, and it takes quite an effort to deny it. You really have to try hard to deny it, and people do. But I think by making, I've heard young people, 15 and 16-year-olds say, "Oh well, we won't be here in 10 years because we're all going to be underwater. We're all going to die." That's just irresponsible that someone said that, and I do think there's an element of that.
It is being said.
Yeah, and so we need to come in, but that's always been.
Could I just go on?
Yeah.
I've seen a number of documentaries, and I think you have, particularly if you watch the History Channel, about the Hitler Youth, how Hitler, what he did to the youth to get their support. Now, that was at a very dangerous level, and he had a commitment from people who were just blinded by wisdom. Blind to wisdom.
This means we need to the way we teach, the way we think of education needs to slightly change, because I think to take another tack here, what we tend to ask young people now is we want them to prepare for a vocation, for a job, and we see education in economic terms, and yet it must be seen in terms of character. What you need to learn, from your years in high school and university is that you don't know everything. Lesson number one, and you'll be beautifully prepared for, and that life is dangerous. so it's precious. So that it's a totally different, and we need to actually have the conversation about about what virtues are needed, and humility being prized among them. Thank you. There's much to say there. Yeah, some other questions or comments, lines of inquiry.
Michael,
Warwick.
very, very interesting. I'm starting to think about a few angles here. So what is the beginning of wisdom? Is it being wise?
No, so
what comes first?
So the fear of the Lord. So this is the process here. The fear of the Lord, in the text, it says the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, or the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, or the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Hebrew is a great language for saying the same thing in different ways, and so it's this humility before, or this sense of awe before. I'm secularizing now, before that which transcends us. So I can imagine a person saying, look, I look into the universe, I see, wow, I can see my perspective now. So the beginning of wisdom is knowing that you're not God. I think, as a believer, that it's also knowing that God is God. But I'm in a secular conversation, I can see how that can be adapted to whatever it is that you're not the center of the universe, it turns out. So that's the first step to knowledge, to understanding the world truly, which is why very, very clever people can be very, very unwise. There's great stories about the cabinets assembled for the United States in the 60s, that went into an intractable land war in Asia and spent millions and millions of dollars and thousands of lives on an unwinnable war against what looked like a tiny opposition. And yet they were the smartest guys in the, these hugely clever people. Or the great slogan about the Enron guys, who were the smartest guys in the room, and yet led to a financial collapse. Clever people can do very, very unwise things, it turns out, because they believe they're the center of the universe. Yeah, anyone else? Or what else? Thomas.
I almost hate to bring this subject up, but with the increasing emphasis on education and vocation towards the STEM subjects, is it not true that, at least in my perspective, we are encouraging people not to be humble, in the sense that if you're going to excel in those areas, humbleness is not a desired trait. So it almost seems like the thrust towards STEM education, with the accompaniment of humbleness being part of the scientific method, are at opposite ends with each other.
Yes. I mean, of course, it's a great mistake to think that in STEM subjects, humility, humbleness are not desired. They should be desired. Because science proves the conspiracy theorists right when it's not humble, and when it becomes corrupted by arrogance. When the professor bullies the students into replicating his results, which happens, that sort of thing, when he steals the results of other people, or when it's all about someone's career and their grant. This is when STEM subjects, which have the authority of pure knowledge, actually turn out to be the purveyors of misinformation and sometimes lies. So we need this humility, and the humility, by the way, is an understanding of your own fallibility and your own moral fallibility, so that we are corruptible. Not just we make mistakes, but we're prone to corruption. We should know that about ourselves. It's a really important part of wisdom. That's why Christians practice confession, because it reminds us of not just our fallibility, but our corruptibility. And I agree with you entirely that you need a balanced education. If we want to actually do well in the STEM subjects, we need people who embody the virtues. See, Rick, who embody these virtues, who know about them. So I read a book about Islam, actually, which was by a Muslim who was complaining that in many Muslim countries, STEM subjects have been so sort of prized over textual learning how to read properly. And this meant that you ended up with a very wooden view of the religious texts, and you ended up with people who are very good at science but very bad at humanities. So that's been a very toxic mix, and I see that in the West as well. I don't think Islam is the only. It leads to the worst excesses of fundamentalism, in fact, because people they don't know how to read.
Well, I was thinking more in the context of being forgiving of our premier, for example, by saying, look, I don't know how this COVID should be played out. I mean, I'm taking it day by day. And that seems to me to be a very strong position for her to take, by admitting that she just doesn't know.
I think so. I think the three hardest words to say in the English language are not "I love you," but "I don't know."
Yeah. I need help.
And I need help, yeah. And I think we should be much more. We expect so much from people. We're very, very judgmental. Again, I think wisdom should tell us not to be so judgmental. And we're very, very judgmental. I mean, have you ever run a nation in a pandemic? So it's going to be a difficult job. So mistakes are going to be made. Doesn't mean we should be critical, but I think we could be a little bit less damning all the time.
Thank you, Michael. If there are no other comments, does anybody else have anything to say?
I just wanted to ask a quick question, if I may, Thomas.
Yes.
I was just wondering, Michael, in those in my very limited life experience, have observed to what appears to me to be wise, there seems to be a common almost stillness in those individuals that allows them to tap into time memorial or something like that to understand that there's not a need to respond with okay, the marketing people go over here, you guys do this and that. The wise person tends to stare into blankness for a minute before he even responds, or she responds. Is that a tendency that you've observed in your learning?
Yes, and interestingly, the Bible backs this up, because many of the Proverbs say that that it's foolish to speak quickly and rapidly, have a rapid answer for everything is not necessarily wise. The wise person actually might refrain from saying anything. It's better to be silent and thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. As they say. So I think that's right. There's a sort of stillness to the genuinely wise person. They're slow to judge. They're patient with others. They're ready to listen, and that takes practice. It takes a deep lack of anxiety in you, because you need to be not anxious about trying to correct everybody's mistakes all the time. And I think that takes hard work. That takes years. You need to be matured like a Grange hermitage,
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
In oak barrels.
Michael, on behalf of our club and all the people that had an opportunity to hear you tonight, I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with us.